Don't call me by that name. The voice wasn't a shout, but a clean, cold cut slicing through the soft hiss of the La Marzocco. The man in the Armani suit, tie loosened, ground the words through clenched teeth. His face burned red amid the marble and polished steel of Aura coffee roasters. Elara held the practiced smile of a barista, but inside, a taut string recoiled. She had seen it. When he opened his leather briefcase, the pink edge of a paper flashed. A termination notice. Restructuring. Optimization. The name Harrison, printed in bold, no longer an identity. It was an indictment. Calling him by name, something she always did to restore dignity, had become a knife pressing against an unhealed wound. "Of course," she said softly, sliding the Americano forward. "Have a good day, sir." He snatched it, coffee sloshing, and left without a glance. Elara exhaled, the aroma of Ethiopia blooming in her chest. Aura didn't just sell coffee. They sold perfection. Lights shifting with the hour, jazz set to just enough, every gesture standardized down to the second. But she saw the cracks. The trembling hand of a med student clutching her latte like an oxygen tube. The vacant eyes of a woman in yoga gear. And she saw those who needed to be seen. "Good morning, Professor Finch." The old man with silver hair and a threadbare tweed coat stepped inside. Alistair Finch, who had spent a lifetime teaching history in Chicago, now walked in a fog. He didn't come for caffeine. He came to hear that his name still existed. "Good morning, Elara," he said. "Do you know what makes today special?" Elara sliced the almond croissant she had set aside. "The day the flag still flew over Fort McHenry, right?" He smiled. She placed the Earl Grey in his hands. "Here you are. Stay strong, Professor." He nodded and shuffled to his armchair. The door chime rang again, this time sharper. Julian Croft entered, not as a customer, but as an inspector. Charcoal suit tailored tight, eyes scanning like measuring tools. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. He measured the cue, the speed, the excess motions. Elara stooped to pick up a pacifier for a young mother. Julian checked his watch. She asked David, the designer, "How's the presentation with the Japanese partners?" Julian noted, 17 seconds. Small kindnesses lit up in his eyes like system leaks. The line shortened. Julian closed in at the counter. "Ms. Vance. Office. 5 minutes." His tone was as flat as an announcement. The back office was a white box, smelling of toner. Julian didn't sit. He handed her a memo in bold. Customer Experience Optimization Procedure, CEP 3.2. 3 bullet points like lashes. Transaction time under 45 seconds. Greeting/closing must follow the script. Limit conversation outside the order. "Your performance is 18% below average," he said, voice even. 62 seconds per transaction. 17 seconds multiplied across a year. Can you calculate how much money that is? Elara stayed silent. Numbers couldn't measure Finch's smile or David's nod, but they weighed on spreadsheets like verdicts. Julian lowered his voice. "This is a profit pipeline, not a therapy lounge. Every name you remember is a second lost. Every story you listen to is a dollar drained. End it, or we'll find someone else." He pushed the page forward. Ink still warm. Bold letters blurred before Elara's eyes, dissolving into strings of numbers. Her hand tightened on the paper's edge. Through the frosted glass, the bar appeared as a perfectly operating stage. Lights, music, marble, the very things that once soothed her, now locked into bars. Beauty remained intact, but the feeling shifted from embrace to captivity. A beep from the ATT screen at the counter pulled her back. Elara set the memo down, breathed evenly, and returned to her shift. The cycle spun on, steaming milk, pulling shots, wiping tables, calling names, tiny capillaries keeping this heart beating. But deep in her chest, a memory jar cracked open. The corridors of social services' sterile white walls, the dry voice calling her by file number. No name, no story. Elara blinked, restored her professional smile. "1 caramel macchiato for Sarah," she called, her voice warmer. She wrote, "Sarah," clearly on the cup. each stroke stitching shut an invisible tear. From the office, Julian checked his watch. In a shadowed corner, a man in an old coat and outdated glasses watched. Elara didn't yet know his name, but she felt his gaze, not measuring, not judging, only present. She lifted her head. The cafe was splendid, orderly, seamless. And in the middle of its optimization machinery, she stood like an error marked for correction. The glass wall at the front was no longer a window to the street. In her eyes, it fused into cold, transparent bars, a gilded cage. Inside the cage, names still remained, fragile as threads, yet the only thing she had to hold others and to hold herself. The memo was not just a warning. It was a sentence hanging over Elara's head, and Julian Croft had no intention of letting it stay on paper. The very next day, a red LED screen was installed above the counter. Numbers flickered erratically like a failing heartbeat. 56 seconds, 49 seconds, 63 seconds. Every order, every smile she offered, the digits flared like accusations. Customers hardly noticed, but employees swallowed hard. Julian stood at a distance, eyes fixed on the display like a man gripping a whip. For him, the numbers were the only truth. For Elara, they were handcuffs tightening around her wrists. It didn't stop there. Julian reshuffled the schedule. The familiar faces she cherished, Professor Finch, Ms. Albright, and David, vanished from her orbit. He cut her morning shifts and pushed her into chaotic hours, severing the connections she had nurtured, as if he wanted to break her spirit by stripping away the people who kept her alive. In those same days, an invisible man began to appear. He sat quietly in the farthest corner, where the lights did not reach. An old wool coat, thin-rimmed, outdated glasses, shoulders bent as though bearing shadows themselves. He ordered only a black coffee, no sugar, no milk. Elara noticed him precisely because of his silence. In a place where everyone tried to look as though they belonged, he faded into the background, almost erased. No employee asked his name, but Elara remembered him. In her mind, she called him the Watcher. Each time she handed him his cup, she held back the question aching to spill. "What is your name?" But he only nodded faintly, then drank in silence. His eyes followed the room, the customers, the staff, and sometimes they lingered on her. Night, after a long shift, Elara returned to her small apartment. She pulled out an old wooden box hidden beneath her bed. Inside lay a frayed stuffed animal and a thick file folder. On its cover, stamped in heavy ink, Case File Number 2187, Jane Doe. Elara's fingers traced the number, and memories surged. A little girl stood before a social worker's desk. The woman flipped pages, her voice dry. This child, File Number 2187. No name, no story, just data. That little girl had sworn that one day, no one else would be erased like that she would remember every name, every small story, because it was the only way to return the dignity she herself had never been given. For Elara, calling someone by name was not a professional skill. It was an act of rebellion. Meanwhile, on a high floor overlooking the Chicago River, a silent penthouse lay still. Arthur Sterling, the founder of Aura Coffee, sat before the window. He looked at the photograph of his late wife, Aura. Her smile glowed in the frame, hands cradling a cappuccino, the dream that had birthed the chain. Aura once said, "Aura Coffee must be a third space, not just a place to drink, but to connect." Here, a name is more important than a transaction. Now Arthur turned through the reports Julian sent. Performance, optimization, profit growth, cold words, as if he were reading a eulogy for his wife's dream. He felt himself a ghost in the empire he had built. That was why he put on the old coat, went down to the street, and sat in the shadows of his own flagship cafe. Not to measure profits, but to search for where Aura's soul might still be alive. Julian's patience wore thin. Seeing Elara still defiant, he struck his final blow, transferring her to the night shift. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the ghost hours. The cafe now held only exhausted drivers, sleepless students, and a few wandering souls. No Finch, no David, No, Ms. Albright. Only Elara, standing in an aura colder than ever before. To Julian, it was exile. Cut her off from the community. Let her dissolve into anonymity. To Elara, it was her worst fear returning, to be cut off from names, from stories, drowned in silence. She stood in the cafe one rainy night, staring through the glass window. Across the street, the aura sign glowed bright, but inside her, there was only darkness. Each raindrop, sliding down the glass, was like a stroke erasing her own reflection. In the corner, the watcher still sat, his black coffee untouched. He looked out at the rain, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He saw Elara as though he were seeing himself, a ghost wandering in a world once called home. Elara drew a long breath, gripping the marker in her hand. In the storage room, she found an old notice board. On it, with shaky yet defiant strokes, she wrote, "Here, every name matters." Beneath that line, she wrote the first, Professor Alastair Finch. Storyteller. Friend. She pinned the board to the wall, under the lonely hum of the night shift light. A small act, yet a thunderous echo against the system trying to devour her. And somewhere in the shadows, the watcher smiled, just barely. The first morning without Elara, Aura Coffee felt like a stage stripped of its music. A new barista, ponytail tight, hands efficient, voice brisk. Name for the order? The customer nodded and spoke their name. She typed it into the screen without ever looking up. Professor Alastair Finch walked in, his old tweed coat damp with morning mist. He scanned the room, searching for the familiar face. No Elara. Where is she? He asked. Her shift got changed. The barista answered with a shrug. Finch stood still, as though someone had pulled the rug of memory out from under him. He stepped out of line, eyes unfocused, then turned and left without ordering coffee. Days later, a police car pulled up outside the cafe. Red and blue lights flashed across the glass. Two officers entered, speaking quietly with Julian. Elara, arriving early for a night shift, overheard a trembling co-worker whisper, "Mr. Finch got lost." They found him sitting on a bench a few blocks away, couldn't remember his own name. He just kept mumbling, "Elara, she knows." Her heart sank like glass shattering on the floor. The digits on the ATT screen suddenly looked like weapons. Julian's system wasn't just cold, it was dangerous. She looked through the window and saw Julian, arms folded before the police, his voice flat. "We are not responsible for customers once they leave the premises." Cold, smooth, without a flicker of humanity. Elara felt she had lost something larger than a job. Finch wasn't just a customer. He was proof that every name held a soul. And Julian had deleted him with the press of key. In the shadows, the watcher saw everything. He saw Elara's smile fracture, saw Julian as a spotless executioner. Arthur Sterling knew then. What Julian called efficiency was the corrosion of compassion, the very soul Aura, his wife, had built into the brand. He gripped his black coffee as if trying to hold on to its last ember of warmth. That night, in the small break room, Elara found an old notice board. She placed it on the counter, her hands trembling. Then, with a black marker, she wrote in bold, "Here, every name matters." Beneath it, she inscribed the first, Professor Alastair Finch, storyteller. Friend. She pinned the board to the wall. The night shift light flickered across the shaky letters, each stroke a blade of defiance. A few of the rare night customers read it, looked at her, and nodded quietly. The next morning, Julian walked in. His shoes struck the marble floor, echoing like a judge's gavel. Then he saw the board. Rage flared, turning his face into a mask. He ripped it from the wall and hurled it down before the wide-eyed customers. "Do you think this is some kind of joke? This is a multi-million-dollar enterprise, not a community center for losers." The cafe fell silent. Elara, just finishing her night shift, stepped out. She stood tall, eyes locked on his. Her voice was almost a whisper, yet sharp as steel. "You took from him the last thing he had. You erased his name." She paused, letting the words sink into the cold floor. Then her gaze pierced him, just like they once erased mine. Silence blanketed the room. The coffee grinder stilled, the jazz died. Time itself stopped. In the far corner, Arthur Sterling set down his cup. In his eyes, the curtain fell. No more illusion, only the raw truth. Julian clenched his teeth, his voice erupting across the cafe. "You're fired." Elara didn't argue. She turned away, stepped into the staff room, and packed a few personal items into a small box. When she emerged, an older woman grasped her hand, voice trembling. "Thank you for everything." Elara nodded gently, her smile flickering like a candle before it goes out. Julian watched her leave, his eyes gleaming with triumph. But he didn't see. On the wall, where the board had been torn down, a small yellow sticky note had been placed. On it was written, "Susan R., mother of 2 noisy kids." Just a scrap, but a beginning. Elara left the cafe with a small box in her hands. Inside were only a few trinkets, a Polaroid snapshot with regular customers, an old spoon she always used to froth milk, and a name tag that read Elara Vance. As she stepped through the glass doors, the bell chimed, this time like a farewell toll. Inside, the cafe resumed its mechanical rhythm. Julian stood tall, basking in victory. But only hours later, something strange began. On the wall where Elara's board had once hung, a yellow sticky note appeared. "Susan R., mother of 2 noisy kids." By noon, another one. "Ben, always late." By evening, the wall was speckled with notes. Customers had begun writing their own names, sticking them up as an act of quiet rebellion. They order not by code, but by their real names. Emily, researcher, always forgets her wallet. Carlos, always extra cinnamon. Maya, freshman, writing a paper on Kafka. The scraps of paper transformed a lifeless wall into the canvas of a community. But with it came consequences. Flagship revenue declined. Loyal customers drifted away, some traveling farther just to find wherever Elara worked, or simply to protest. Julian's efficiency had killed loyalty. At headquarters, Arthur Sterling called an emergency board meeting. He did not begin with philosophy or memories. He laid a stack of revenue charts on the table. Red lines plunged straight down. "This is our flagship store," Arthur said, his voice low but steady. "The symbol of Aura Coffee. And these are the numbers after 3 weeks of Croft's policies." The room was silent except for the shuffle of papers. Julian sat opposite, his face taut, but still forced a smile. "Temporary decline, Mr. Sterling. Customers will adjust their habits." Arthur leaned forward. "Customers are not habits. They're people. And we forgot that." A CFO cut in. "So what do you propose? Going back to the old ways? We can't build a business on sentiment." Arthur slid another file across. Inside were dozens of emails and messages from loyal patrons. They complained. They mourned. They said Aura Coffee had lost its soul. Arthur raised his gaze, his voice striking like a hammer. "We don't sell coffee. We sell connections. Julian Croft has sold off our most valuable asset, just to save a few seconds." Silence drowned the room. There was nothing left to defend. The next day, Arthur appeared at the flagship store. But this time, no old coat. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a silver tie, and walked like a king returning to his throne. Julian was mid-tirade, scolding a new employee for spilling milk. At that moment, Arthur's voice rang out. "Mr. Croft." Julian turned, stunned. For a few seconds, he did not recognize the unassuming man who had sat in the corner for weeks. The watcher now stood before him with undeniable authority. "My office. Now." He didn't need to shout. Arthur spoke, and Julian followed like a man being led to trial. But before dealing with Julian, Arthur had another task. He found Elara sitting on a bench by the river, the small box beside her, her eyes empty. He sat down without introduction, without preamble. "My wife, Aura," he began, his voice rough. She believed a name was magic. "It is the beginning and the end of every story." Elara turned, startled. He went on, "She and I built Aura Coffee to be a place where people didn't just drink, but were seen. Then I lost her, and I lost myself. I read Julian's reports, the numbers, the jargon. It was like reading the obituary of her dream." He paused, looking directly into Elara's eyes. I went searching for the soul of this company, and it wasn't in a boardroom. It was a barista fired for caring too much. Elara swallowed hard. Arthur spoke slowly, each word like a vow. I'm not offering you a job, Miss Vance. I'm asking you to come home. Help me rebuild Aura, not by Sterling standards, but by Aura's standard. The true one. Elara glanced down at the small box. The old spoon. The name tag was suddenly heavy in her hands. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. In the darkness behind her lids, she heard again the social worker's voice from years ago. Case number 2187. Then, facing Arthur, she whispered, My name is Elara. I will return. In the office, Julian tried to argue, citing metrics, defending himself with profit models. But Arthur was no longer the fated ghost. He was the founder, the man who had built the dream with his wife. You forgot, Arthur said, his voice resounding. Aura Coffee wasn't built from marble or steel. It was built from names. And you destroyed it. Julian was silent. The door closed behind him like a prison gate. Outside, Elara stepped into the cafe for the first time in weeks. Customers recognized her. Murmurs spread like wildfire. An elderly woman whispered, She's back. A student grinned. Elara, you remember my name, right? Elara smiled. A real smile, not the scripted one. Aura Coffee had a heartbeat again. Julian Croft quietly packed up his office. The Mont Blanc pen, the thick stacks of reports, the stopwatch that had once been his weapon, all tucked neatly into a black case. When he lifted his head through the glass pane, he saw workers mounting a massive oak plaque in the lobby. The lights gleamed across the carved golden words, Here, every name matters. His grip tightened on the case handle, his face frozen. No number could save him from that verdict. He walked away, his figure vanishing like a man erased from the very world he once controlled. Meanwhile, at the flagship store, a training session was underway. No PowerPoint slides, no optimization charts. Only Elara, in her familiar apron, was standing before rows of new employees. Her eyes glowed with a steady flame. The first lesson at Aura, she said, is not how to pull an espresso, not how to steam milk. The first lesson is how to listen to a name. She placed her hand over her chest. My name is Elara. I'm glad to meet you. Now, one by one, tell me yours. The names rang out, awkward at first, then warmer. The once sterile room seemed to heat with the syllables of presence. A young woman's voice trembled. I'm Maria. Elara smiled. It's wonderful to meet you, Maria. Here, your name matters. That afternoon, Arthur Sterling sat in his familiar corner of the cafe. No longer cloaked in anonymity, he sat upright, silver hair catching the late sunlight. A new barista, Maria, approached, placing a cup of black coffee before him. Your black coffee, Mr. Sterling. Have a good day. Arthur looked up. For the first time in years, his smile reached his eyes. Thank you, Maria. 2 simple words, but they confirmed it. He was no longer a ghost in his own empire. He was a man, called by his name, seen at last. The soul of Aura had returned. The flagship store was crowded again, but not with the cold buzz of transactions. It was alive with harmony. Names being called, laughter, small stories woven into the fragrance of coffee. Elara stood behind the counter, writing Sarah on a cup, the letters rounded and sure, before handing it to a young woman. Here you go, Sarah. Her face shone, no longer shadowed by sorrow, but lit by the peace of someone who had found her place. The doorbell chimed as another customer entered. Elara looked up, smiling, ready to hear a new name, to begin a new story. Have you ever wondered, can a name save a soul? Elara showed us that sometimes what people crave is not perfection or speed, but to be called by their true name, to be seen, to be acknowledged. Julian could optimize every second, but he forgot the truth. The human heart cannot be measured in numbers. And that was his undoing. Arthur Sterling, once a ghost in his own empire, found Aura Coffee's soul again, thanks to a barista dismissed as inefficient. Elara did more than change a store. She rekindled the legacy of a late wife and gave an entire brand a new heart. This story reminds us, true success is not profit, but connection. Not how many customers are served, but how many people are called by their names? And what about you? Have you ever felt like just a number in someone else's eyes? Leave a comment and share your story. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Talk Story, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that touches the heart. Because every story, just like every name, matters.